So we'll just start with the 4 immeasurable thoughts, if you feel comfortable reciting them, or if you'd rather just sit and contemplate. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. So just take a minute and let your mind connect with those 4 immeasurables. Love, compassion, joy, and equanimity. And may whatever we do in this life help to fulfill those aims. In particular, this talk tonight, this course ahead of us. And then just ask yourself a question for a moment. Ask yourself, why do the things I don't want to happen, happen? Why don't I always get what I want? When things go really well, when I'm very happy, how come? Where does that come from? What's involved? Okay, so you can relax your attention. It's good to start out before you learn anything new to kind of try and connect with what do you think so far. Because some of what you think so far is probably spot on, and some of it might be conditioned by different superstitions, different ways of learning, and might need to be corrected. But if you don't kind of know where you are to begin with, it's hard to build. So the teachings on karma are probably the most widely understood topic in Buddhism and the most widely misunderstood, right? So when people hear Buddhism, they understand that we believe something about karma, right? You kind of have this general assumption Buddhists believe in karma, yeah? But what we know about karma is that if you're good, it'll be good. If you're bad, it'll be bad, right? And that's kind of like as complex as your understanding is, generally speaking, unless you've studied. Is that sort of the case, or do a few of you have a more nuanced understanding what is karma? Yeah. So it's interesting to just kind of sit with how come? What does that look like? What are the factors involved? What do we do with this information? Is karma the same thing as fate? That's the first question. Just using your own intelligence, using your own background study, is karma the same thing as fate? Nope. Gold star? Nope. Is it the same thing as destiny? Nope. Is it a punishment or a reward? Nope. Right? But the way we talk about it colloquially is as if that's the case, right? The way we use karma in conversation, whether you're Buddhist or not, it has that edge of, like, this is your fate, this is your destiny, this is what's going to happen. If good things happen to you, you're being rewarded. If bad things happen to you, you're being punished. And none of that is actually the teaching on karma. But when we talk about it, that's kind of what's imbued, isn't it? It's interesting. So, who's in charge of karma? Self, yeah? Yeah, absolutely, yourself. Particularly what bit of the self do you think?
Your mind.
Your mind, exactly. What part of your mind? Big category, slightly smaller category, slightly smaller category. What's under mind, do you think, is the main component in karma? Just kind of using your own logic, even if you've never studied this, what do you think is the main thing that creates karma?
Ego.
Ego, unfortunately, plays a part. Yes, absolutely. Yep, and ego influences what do you think? Yeah, your thoughts. It's a mental factor. So the particular mental factor that creates karma is intention, yeah, or motivation. Your intention is the main thing that creates karma. And so we do create karma through very vague, non-specified intentions. You know, from walking from here to the doorway, we don't think you're making a big decision about that. You just get up and go. However, the mental factor of intention is present. It's just not as verbal as sometimes. So when we're talking about karma, we're really talking about actions and their effects. And when these teachings were taught by the Buddha, he was very clear about the fact that these are extremely hidden phenomena. All of phenomena, or everything that exists, can be divided into kind of three categories. Manifest, or really obvious things, hidden things, and extremely hidden things. Yeah, three levels. So manifest phenomena is what we can access with our senses. Yeah, it's what we're involved with every day. It's what's obvious to us. And then hidden phenomena we're able to access through deep levels of meditation and realization. Extremely hidden phenomena is actually within the realm of perfected mind streams. So the Buddhas, plural. Which means that you cannot actually prove karma to yourself experientially until you're finished with your path. Which is a bit frustrating, right? Because the Buddha is very clear about you shouldn't take things on board unless you've examined them yourself. You shouldn't believe things just because somebody wise said so. You need to look at it deeply and internally. So then what do you do with this premise that positive actions lead to happiness, negative actions lead to suffering, if you won't be able to prove it directly to yourself until the very end of the path? What do you do with that? Yeah, how do you live your life? Right? And so we take it a step back and say, all right, what we need to do is to establish whoever explained karma has to be a valid source. Right? So we first have to start with, is the Buddha a valid being to rely on? Like, is he lying or not? And the way we do that is we look at his teachings that are provable. His teachings related to phenomena that are manifest or obvious to us. We can actually experiment with those and prove those experientially to ourselves right away. For example, there's a teaching on what's called self-cherishing. And the teaching on self-cherishing says that when you're self-centered and self-focused and self-absorbed and traditional categorization of narcissism, that you actually suffer more, right? That when you're self-absorbed and self-conscious and selfish, you're actually in a worse mood, right? And, never mind it being harmful, never mind it not being an accurate way to live, it actually is grumpy making, okay? And so the Buddha would explain, so self-cherishing is no fun and no good, and cherishing others is the source of all happiness. And you can kind of sit with that intellectually, not taking it on board or not, just kind of play with it and let it collaborate with your own life wisdom. Right? You can say, okay, so when I've actually been the most happy, what were my thoughts like? When I've been the most content in my life, was I obsessed with, why can't people just, why do people always, what is wrong with people? Or how can't I, why can't I, what about me, what about me? On your happiest days, that wasn't your train of thought. On your happiest days, you were probably just really expansive, really broadly focused, and getting the job done, whatever it was. You were probably more present, you were probably more connected. Yeah, there was a sense of connection and purpose and meaning with other people. Do you reckon? So, so just, on the surface it seems like looking after yourself first is reasonable, practical, and should make you happy. But the days that you actually become obsessed that way are the days you become more and more alienated from other sentient beings, more and more alienated from other people, and even more unhappy. Yeah? When we're really unhappy, it's when we're the most self-absorbed. Yeah. So that's an interesting teaching, right? And before you've even meditated on it, before you've even really deeply looked at your own experience of it, you can have a taste of how that's true. Because it's a manifest phenomena. Are you with me? Right? So it's something that you can just kind of play with and come to some experience with a very short amount of time. And then if you were to do a lot of meditation on it, within a few weeks, months, or years, you would start to see a change in your attitude and a change in your life and a change in your degree of happiness if you really applied yourself and didn't let it just kind of hover in intelligence. If you brought it down to your heart, your life would change. So you could prove that the Buddha told the truth there. What else does he have to say? That worked out well. Let's try something else. What's he say about anger? What's he say about jealousy? What's he say about all the different things that hurt myself, that hurt others? And we could really start to prove to ourselves that his logic is sound, that his tools are accurate, and the results he says actually come about. So we play around with the things that we can prove, and it gives us a kind of conviction, or even faith, but it's a faith based in reason, that the things that we can't prove right away probably are true. Yeah, so we can kind of take it as a premise, or we can take it as a working theory that these things we can't prove right away are probably true, because these things we can prove, we've proved already. Does that make sense? So then another level that we do is we ask ourselves, what would happen if I lived in this way? What would happen if I lived in a really, really ethical way, aware that destructive, negative, harmful actions of body, speech, and mind lead to suffering, and positive, constructive, virtuous states of mind lead to happiness? What if I just adopted that as my working theory and lived that way? Would anything bad happen? Yeah. So whether it's true or not, if I just took that on board as an idea or as a framework for my ethics, would it go well? Right? So you can kind of ask yourself, how would it play out if I took this on board? And if it's not going to cause any obvious harm in your life, all right, why not? If there's immediate daily life positive impacts in living in an ethical way, why not? Right? Even if you're a friendly nihilist, right? An ethical nihilist, do you think you're going to be on your deathbed thinking, I wish I'd been less ethical? As you die, will you think, I wish I'd hurt more people? I wish I'd been more self-centered, right? The people that I love in my life, I wish I'd really never told them that. And the people I don't like, I wish I'd held more grudges and really told them off more often and been a lot more critical and divisive. Even a nihilist, right, is not going to regret having lived ethically, right, unless they've gotten themselves really dodgy, right? So you can use these two, right? You can prove to yourself, all right, Buddha is a valid being. He's not going to lie to me because I've proved these things to myself. Or living in this way actually is a good way to live, regardless of if the teachings on karma are true or not. It's a good way to live. Do you have any questions so far? Any additions or doubts? Does that make sense? Yeah?
It's very hard to live always ethical.
Mm-hmm. Why is it hard to live ethically? What do you do instead of ethics? That's the good question.
You have to do a thing for your own, not to take care of others.
Yep. It's much easier to also look at the immediate happiness as opposed to long-term happiness. Yeah, it is. We're really short-sighted. And it's easy to stay short-sighted because being short-sighted works for a second, right? Which is why it's so hard to be on a diet, right? You're like, look, I know that eating chocolate cake every day is going to make me fat and tired, but it's so delicious right now, right? we know better. However, in the immediate, there's no obvious negative impact. We know that over time there's a negative impact, but we don't allow ourselves to have the broad vision. Yeah, so this short-sightedness is something we all suffer from, and is why a lot of our unethical behavior comes about. We don't see the long view. We know just really basic, really child ethics. If you're nice to people, they're nice to you, right? Like, it's so basic, right? Why are people mean to you? Why are people critical of you? Why do people disrespect you? It could be because they don't like you. Why don't they like you? Maybe you're hell to live with, right? Like, that's a cringy thought, yeah? Maybe it's not nice to be around you and they want to be away. Sometimes that's true, right? Sometimes it is just their stuff and they're going through a bad thing and no one is going to satisfy them and no one's going to live up to their expectations and they're just a grumpy bugger, right? But sometimes people disrespect you because it's not pleasant to be around you, right? How embarrassing, right? Surely it's not my fault. Surely not. Yeah, we want to think, what's wrong with them? Right? And of course, a very, very kind, very, very steady, very, very ethical person could cope with someone who's a bit dodgy and still be friendly, right? But most people are easily swayed by conditions, and those conditions are kind of what we bring to the moment. And if we're bringing our best self, they usually respond in a friendly way, and if we bring our worst self, they usually respond in a negative way. It's not rocket science, right? We know this already. And yet we're still mad at them? Right? You're like, look, I'm having a bad day, but that's no reason for you to be mean to me. Right? Look, I know I'm being rude, but still you should be patient. It's interesting, right? We have this kind of funny logic. So one of the reasons that we're not ethical is short-sightedness. One of the reasons is because we're self-centered. But also we have a false logic about what gives us happiness. So one of the things to know about karma is that what you're experiencing in the present moment is not because of the present moment. What you're experiencing right now is not because of right now. What you're experiencing right now is coming from the past, and how you respond to it creates the future. And this is where we get tangled, right? We get so tangled because if we're having an experience right now, it seems only logical that it's because of what's happening right now. But even if you don't believe in karma, you do probably believe in basic psychology, that we are conditioned beings. We're creatures of habit. So if you're predisposed to think that whatever temperature this is right now is unacceptable, right? You think this is an unacceptable temperature. Then as soon as you start to feel this heat, you're grumpy, and you think it's because of this temperature. Yeah? But it's actually because of how you've labeled this temperature. That's the condition, and then it's bringing a seed from the past to ripen as suffering. Yeah? If you'd conditioned yourself different, say you grew up in a very hot climate, you would label this particular temperature differently. You think, oh, it's really nice right now. And then you'd be happy, and you'd think, oh, I'm so happy because of the temperature. And it still wouldn't be about the temperature, right? It's really interesting, right? And if we were to do a survey of everyone in the room, some would be comfortable, some would be uncomfortable, and some would be somewhere in between. But it's the same temperature for everybody, right? And there's physiological differences and like clothing layer issues, but actually there's more subtle things at play. Yeah? If someone upsets you, you forget that actually you upset yourself in response to their behavior. It's a lot more confronting to look at life that way. You've upset yourself in response to their behavior, right? Much easier to say they're bad, yeah? But actually it's more empowering, right? You have more control. You have more power in your life if you remember that actually I upset myself in response to that particular set of behaviors. If I had labeled those set of behaviors differently, I would be having a different experience of this. And you can see how easy it would become then to become complacent and not call people on bad behavior, right? Or to become a doormat or a martyr. And that's not what this teaching is about. The teaching on karma is about personal responsibility. Yeah, personal responsibility, personal power, personal effectiveness, It has nothing to do with other people. Yeah, it's taking the power back from external conditions, which means that if something needs to be done externally, it's coming from a place of peace rather than a place of agitation. Does that make sense? Because you know there are times when someone gets on your nerves, and that same person doesn't get on your nerves a different day. And they might be doing the same behavior 2 days in a row, but some days it bugs you and some days it doesn't. And despite having seen that over the course of your life, you still think it's their fault. Right? So it's going to take so much repetition of accurate logic before we can wire ourselves differently. But once you wire yourself differently, life is not so much of a struggle. You don't feel like such a victim of everything, right? Or being rewarded for things. Just say this is natural cause and effect. Yeah, just cause and effect. Not punishment, not reward. If I plant an apple seed and I give it water and light, it will grow into an apple tree. And it doesn't matter how much I pray, it will not become bananas. Yeah. So karma is like this. So the facts of karma basically are that karma is definite or certain, meaning that the happiness only comes from positive actions. Suffering only comes from negative actions. But again, they're past positive actions and past negative actions. Yeah? So this is tricky because we have both what's called a substantial cause, like the seed or the potential, and we have the coactive conditions. And so the conditions are influenced by so many things. So many things can be a condition for a specific seed to sprout into happiness or suffering. But one of the biggest conditions is the way we label things. One of the biggest conditions for bringing up a karmic seed to ripen as happiness or suffering is how we label it. And so it's said that bodhisattvas, or people that are very advanced on the spiritual path who have uncontrived bodhicitta, when they see a difficult person, they're not pretending the difficult person isn't difficult, right? They're saying, difficult people are really useful to my path. If I didn't have difficult people, I would never develop patience. I would have a certain degree of empathy and compassion that would be less. I wouldn't be challenging my own weaknesses. I need difficult people for my spiritual development, so I am happy to see you. You are so awful, thank goodness. Right? And so they're actually happy when they see someone badly behaved. Yeah? Which is totally different to what we want to do if we're being like fake nice, if we're being artificial or ingenuine. We see a bad person or a badly behaved person, and we think, no, they're good. No, they're not. They're awful, but that's good. Yeah, we skip a step. Yeah, we kind of put sort of a filter over what we see and say, oh, no, they're not so bad. Oh, no, that behavior's not so bad. No, it's horrible, and that's great. Yeah, do you see the difference? It is useful that this behavior challenges me, because without this moment, I would be weaker. Thank you for being so hard, right? Yeah, and if you get used to this way of thinking, you're actually genuinely happy to see difficult people. At our level, we won't be, right? At our level, we'll be like, go away. Yeah, see? Poor baby. At our level, we see someone who's behaving out of sync with worldly ethics or out of sync with social norms, and we're aggravated. We want them to fall in line. Yeah, do what the group's doing. Behave the way the group's agreed is the right way. Come on, fall in line. That's what we normally think. But at our level, we can still think, despite wanting that, how can I use this? Otherwise, I give them all the power to take my happiness. Yeah? And if I give them all the power to take my happiness, it doesn't actually make their behavior any better. Yeah? Just because you've become grumpy or you've become affronted, or if you've become outraged or irritable, it in no way changes the behavior of the difficult person. If you become sad and depressed and melancholy and forlorn and full of self-loathing and full of sadness about the human condition and what is wrong with humanity, that also does not change their behavior. Right? It seems completely reasonable to have those reactions, but it is not reasonable. It's natural, and they're different things. Natural just means habitual. Natural doesn't mean necessary. Do you know what I mean? So reasonable, no. Reasonable from the perspective of your entitlement and your self-cherishing and your afflictions, yeah, reasonable from that perspective, but not reasonable from the perspective of wisdom. You with me so far? So these teachings on karma can become quite empowering because then you actually don't need people to change for you to have a better life. The outside world actually doesn't have to change at all, and you can still find more peace there. And you can build your resilience so much so that anywhere you go, it doesn't disturb your peace of mind, and that is such a satisfying experience. You know, you can think about times in your life when you've been challenged and come out the other side stronger for it. There's a deep satisfaction from that kind of moving through a process. Yeah, you didn't know you could do that. You didn't know you'd be able to cope with that, and then you did, and you were successful, and you think, oh, that's time well spent. Yeah, that horrible boss, right? That difficult brother, that horrible mother-in-law, and you somehow found a way to communicate, or found a way to not shut down your heart, or found a way to not be angry. It's a satisfying feeling. Yeah, you didn't give over all your power. So the second piece is that karma increases or magnifies. And this is like good news or bad news, right? Depending on is it good karma or bad karma. But basically, think of karma like a ripple effect. You know, if you chuck a rock in a pond, all the ripples that radiate outward. Or if you plant a seed and a tree grows, there's many, many branches. So unless you do something about it, whatever you've done, the energy of that keeps radiating and radiating and radiating. Good or bad, right? So it's not just bad news. But also you can think about something like a very good friendship that you've had for 20 years. A really horrible argument could end that. Yeah, so one tiny moment can have a huge ripple effect. It can go kind of both directions in terms of magnifying. So the fact that karma increases is just an interesting thing to sit with because it makes you less complacent about your mistakes. Yeah, you think, oh, that was the wrong thing. If I just let that sit, it's not going to just naturally get better. The surface agitation might settle down, and I might be able to communicate better in a few days, but actually the impact of having done the wrong thing will just continue and continue unless I look at it. But the good things are also that way as well. If you did a really significantly kind thing, a very generous thing, a very patient thing, the energy of that continues to ripple out and radiate internally and externally. So there's just interesting things to think about. Another one is that we only experience the effects of what we ourselves have created. So you cannot transfer karma, right? No karma sharing, no saying, please take this, I'll take that. No. This is interesting, yeah. Because then, whose responsibility is it? Right, it's only yours. So again, good news or bad news depends on how you look at it. But if you're experiencing it, you created it. And so this is where we also get into the conversation of past and future lives, because certainly there are things that we've experienced in this life that we don't, quote, deserve, given what's happened recently. Right? We weren't like a serial killer in this life. Probably. Hopefully. Right? But still, we might have ill health. Still, people in our life might die. Still, we might have dangerous circumstances. And in no way do we deserve that, given what we've done in this life. Certainly we don't deserve it. But in the great scheme of lifetimes, at some point we were the perpetrator, if we're the victim now. And that is a delicate thing and a very personal thing to explore, and not something that you want to tell someone who has just gotten hurt. That's not a helpful conversation, right? If someone's just had their car stolen, to say, oh, it's your karma, not going to make them feel better, right? But for you as an individual, with your own individual practice, to think, my car was stolen, I'm a generous person in this life, I don't steal things in this life, but in a past life, obviously I did, or this wouldn't have happened. That things don't come out of nowhere without cause. Things aren't spontaneous, right? Everything has a cause. Then you can think, all right, so this was unfortunate, and I'll need to do some things to address it. But if I don't want a car stolen again, I need to be on top of the way I manage the possessions of others, and just be very, very ethical about not taking what hasn't been freely offered. If I don't want this to happen again, I need to stop creating the causes. Yeah, and you just get strategic, right? Rather than this, why, you know why, you did it, so stop, right? And if you're not doing it now, you can still be very proactive about doing things that counteract the negative thing you're experiencing. Yeah, so it's more empowering, right? Think, okay, stuff keeps getting stolen from me, stuff keeps falling apart, I never have enough of what I want. Just logically, what would that be about? It would be about miserliness, greed, and stealing. So let's just work on those things as my project in this life. Let's be generous, let's look at my attachment, and let's be really careful of the things that belong to others. And slowly, you change the patterns in your life. So it's interesting, but it very much relies on a belief in past and future lives. Otherwise, something terrible happening to a good person, you think that is not fair, because it's not fair or right in that limited set of conditions and circumstances. But it is in the great scheme of things. And then the last one is actions once done don't go to waste. So once you've done something, good or bad, that little seed or that potentiality hangs out on your mental continuum until it meets with conditions to sprout. And it's never going to go away. Ever. Not ever. Good or bad, until it ripens. And basically, what we do with this information is to say, well, the good stuff we want to keep, all those good kindnesses, all those little everyday friendliness, all of our ethics, we want to keep the momentum of those. It's good that they're not going to waste. We need them. The bad ones, we do want to ruin their ability to give us suffering. Yeah? And so it's not going to go to waste unless we do something. So there's 3 ways to get rid of bad karma. Yeah? The first way to get rid of bad karma is to basically prevent it from arising as suffering, right? To kind of like keep a lid on it so it can't sprout, right? So if it was a real seed, it could hang out there like ready to bear fruit, but if it never gets sunshine, and if it never gets water, and if it never gets conditions, it's never going to sprout. So for us, this means if we have positive states of mind, like compassion, like love, like wisdom, that means negative seeds can't sprout as suffering. Yeah, and it's very hard to stay that mindful all the time, right? We're friendly, then we're distracted, then we're grumpy, then we're friendly, then we're distracted, then we're grumpy, and it can all be within 1 minute, right? Friendly, distracted, grumpy, right? All within 1 minute. But if we're consciously directing our thoughts in a way that's beneficial, negative karma can't pop out. So that's good news. So that's kind of like first tier, like damage control, right? Then the second thing we can do is what's called purification. And purification is a process of burning the ability of the seed to ever sprout as suffering. And we do this through basically strongly and deeply looking at a fault to be a fault. Yeah? We do this through what are called the 4 opponent powers, but the main component is regret. And regret is completely different to guilt. So just in your own life, well, how would you describe the difference between regret and guilt? How are they different? Are they different? First, what's guilt? What do you reckon? What's it like? What does it do? Any Catholics?
It's about blaming yourself?
Yeah, it's about blaming yourself. Yeah. Yeah, it's got kind of a heavy vibe or a self-punishing vibe. Yeah. Yeah, what else is guilt like?
Guilt feels as if it would lead to punishment.
Mm-hmm.
That seems to be the action that it calls for.
Yeah. Yeah. And whether that punishment comes from the outside or you punish yourself, right? Punish yourself. You did the wrong thing, so now you feel bad about it, right? And that's kind of what guilt does, right? It says, because I see that I did the wrong thing, I'm going to feel bad about it, as if that makes up for having done the wrong thing. Does feeling bad about having done the wrong thing change what you did? Does it make it better? Just in and of itself. Like, guilt doesn't help, right? Guilt doesn't help you get better. It doesn't help you change. In a way, guilt gives you permission to stay the same. Because you're like, well, I feel bad about it, right? That was the wrong thing, but I feel bad about it. It kind of lets you keep doing it. Like that's the payment that you have to give to continue the bad behavior. Look, I know I shouldn't download those shows off the internet without paying for them, but I feel bad about it. Right? That doesn't change the fact that you did it. Yeah, I know I shouldn't yell at my mother and be so impatient with her, but I feel bad about it. It's like letting yourself off the hook with self-punishment, which in no way makes you change. There's no word in Tibetan for guilt. Yeah, it takes so long to explain to Tibetan lamas what guilt is, right? They think we're crazy when we explain to them about Westerners and guilt. They think that is a ridiculous way of operating in the world. Why would you do that to yourself? Right? Regret is clean. Regret sees a fault to be a fault. It doesn't see the person who did the fault as being bad. They're totally different things, right? Seeing a fault to be a fault is different to seeing the individual who enacted that behavior as being fundamentally wrong and bad. They're two different things. Yeah? A behavior is not a person. A person is capable of a huge spectrum of behaviors, right? There's so many things we get up to. Why do we decide some of those behaviors are us and some of them aren't? We're changing moment to moment to moment. Which one is you? Yeah? None of them. All of them, right? So seeing a fault to be a fault, then you're proactive about what can I do to not do that. So if it's something that comes really easily or, quote, naturally or habitually, you can't say you're not going to do it again. It's too strong a habit and our mindfulness is too weak. So what you do is you give yourself a finite plan, yeah, of, okay, it was wrong to yell at my mother. It was wrong to be impatient with her. Why? Because it hurts her. Not because I'm bad, but because it hurts her. That's why it's wrong. Yeah, it hurts her and it hurts me because I have an aggressive, irritable, angry state of mind when I do it. It's not comfortable to be angry. It hurts, right? It's not pleasant. So it's not good for her, it's not good for me, it's a fault. All right, so what can I do? All right, so it's when she says these two things that I always get annoyed. All right? So I'm not going to just magically not get annoyed. But what I'm going to do is, the next time we talk, for the first 10 minutes, I'm not going to be reactive. I'm going to let her say whatever she wants, and I'm just going to go, yeah, I'm just going to keep my mouth shut. And then that way I'm going to start to interrupt the momentum of that old reaction. I'm just going to try something different. Yeah, and what that different thing is that you try is very specific and personal to your own life and what you know of it. Yeah, but it's just try something different to interrupt the flow and the momentum of that habit. Just something else for a short period of time. That is the right use of regret. Yeah, regret says, whoops, okay, I'll be careful now. Yeah, it doesn't say that was the wrong thing, therefore I'm bad. Not at all. So this is an empowering way to live, and it's also a way that you actually transform. Yeah. Questions or additions about regret, guilt? Agree, disagree? We're in New Zealand. Yes, go ahead.
Regret can also be a missed opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. You missed the opportunity to be kind, or effective, or happy, or yeah, you missed it.
Or a big deal.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, it's regret is basically seeing that you missed a moment. Yeah, isn't it? Or you missed mindfulness. Yeah, either to do something good or not to do something negative. Yeah, you missed it. And how many things in our life would be different if we were just focused? Yeah, whatever ethics we have already would be right there. That's how we would live if we were just focused. But we're distracted, right? So then we do the short-term goal. When we're focused, we remember the long-term goal. But when we're not focused, we just kind of do what makes sense for this moment only. You know, to heck with the consequences. We do what makes sense for this moment only. And we get away with it because often it doesn't cause immediate disturbance or immediate problems. We can get away with this short-term way of living because it doesn't seem to hurt us right this second. But if we can look back over our life, how many missed opportunities because of distraction? Yeah. So karma we want to look at how basically karma is experienced through the mental factor of feeling. So the mental factor of feeling is just that baseline experiential aspect of you that either says this is pleasant, this is unpleasant, or this is neutral. So karma is experienced through our feelings. Karma is created through our intentions. So in this one moment right here and now, we're having a feeling arise because of the past. How we respond to it creates our future. And because of our patterns, we just respond the same old way, so we create the same old patterns and we get stuck in this loop, in this pattern. So really almost anything that's different than what you normally do is going to help, especially if it's positive, right? But just try to do something else for once. If there's things about the way you think about the world or behave in the world that you know aren't as effective as they could be, just try something else. Interrupt the momentum of the mistake. Does that make sense? So there's a few things that make karma heavy or light, and it's good to know, and it's very logical in the way we're used to thinking about the law in most Western countries. There's a difference between manslaughter and first-degree murder, right? They're both killing somebody, but they're not as heavy a crime. Yeah, so the way that we talk about the law is actually quite similar to how we talk about karma. It's just karma's a little bit more nuanced in some places than the law, and less in others, depending on which country you're in. So the first thing is what makes karma heavy or light is who you do it to. Which seems like some sort of weird prejudice, right? And Buddhists don't believe in the caste system, right? Just to dispel any misconceptions. We don't believe in the caste system, we're not Hindu. And a lot of Hindus don't believe in the caste system anymore either, right? But we're not judgmental or discriminatory in that way. So when I say the karma is related to who you do it to, it's not from that kind of prejudice. We also don't have sexism built into the religion, right? Men and women are equal. All variations of men and women are equal. There's no difference in terms of race, in terms of economics, those kind of things. Everyone has Buddha nature. So this is the kind of baseline we're starting from. But you know that if you say something really unkind, really harsh, really critical to someone who is in your life all the time, it has a more powerful effect than if you do it to a stranger. Could be the same words. Right? And the stranger might also be hurt, but it doesn't land the same. You have less strong karmic connection with strangers than you do with the people in your life, friends or enemies. So the strength is based on what is your relationship with each other. Does that make sense? Right? And it also depends on what that person represents in your life. Yeah? So it said like parents are a very strong source of karma, good or bad. Why? Because they kept us from dying in our first couple years. That was nice of them, right? And then possibly they did friendly things after that, right? In a good day, but our parents made sure we didn't die the first few years. And so that makes our karma with them particularly strong. Also, any kind of spiritual teacher or someone who represents your spiritual path. So this is delicate because for Buddhists, monks and nuns are a heavy object, right? Heavy in good and heavy in bad. But the individual in these robes might be totally dodgy, right? It might just be a regular person with regular afflictions, totally up to no good, right? And so how do we engage with the human being on one level and what they represent on another? Yeah, this monastic represents my path to enlightenment. They represent renunciation and the determination to be free from samsara. They represent the things I aspire to. But today they are annoying the hell out of me. Right? How do you play with that in a way that's skillful, that's acknowledging there's this relationship here, but that there's this representation there? And you really have to play with it in your mind so that you don't get weird one way or the other. Yeah? Similarly with... you notice how people get very excited about heroes in their life or about famous people or about rock stars, right? That what they represent is something other than who they are. Do you know what I mean, right? So there might be like your impression of Bob Dylan, right, for example. Before I saw Bob Dylan perform live, I was just a total fan, right? I was such a fan of Bob Dylan. Such amazing poetry, such profound politics. I was excited about Bob Dylan. Then I saw him play live, and he was just having a really bad day. It was so boring. right? And I was devastated, right? If I was just going to a bar band that I had no expectations of, I might have thought that was nice and enjoyed it. But because I had all these expectations of it's Bob Dylan, it's going to be amazing, I was so disappointed, right? So there was what he represented to me, and then there's what he was. So when we're looking at our own karma, we have to be aware of these two different levels, especially with people that have a symbolism besides the individual personality there. Yeah. Also strong in terms of recipients is someone who's particularly vulnerable. So like sick people or old people or very impoverished people are very heavy forms of karma. So if you're very generous to the poor, that's huge, strong karma. But if you're very dismissive to the poor, say you're really rude to the beggars in India or you're mean to waitresses, that's heavy, right? Because they're particularly vulnerable. So it's interesting to just kind of sit with that, what makes a karma heavy or light. The support is how you go about your behavior. And this is different than the way the world looks at things. The world would say, if you didn't know any better, it's not as bad. Buddhism says, if you don't know any better, it's worse. Because you'll do it again, and again, and again. So ignorance does not let you off the hook, actually. Yeah? You actually have less heavy karma if you know that it's wrong when you do it. Yeah. Now, if you know that it's wrong when you do it, and you do it with strong intention, full of ill will, of course that's very negative. But that's an interesting way to think about it, that if you don't know any better, that actually makes it worse. So it's in our own best interest to become educated about ethics. Yeah. And that's not to say that like an animal or another sort of sentient being that doesn't have the same capacity for knowledge, that doesn't have the same impact, right? So if the hawk that circles around over on that mountain kills a rabbit, it's less heavy karma than if I kill a rabbit, right? So the killing of the rabbit is different depending on our level of knowledge, but we're also talking about the capacity to know. Yeah, so a hawk doesn't know any better, and a hawk needs to eat a rabbit for its life. I don't need to eat a rabbit for my life, right? And I know that that's life and that it's wrong. And plus I have vows. So it's many, many levels of wrong for me to kill the rabbit, whereas the hawk killing the rabbit, not so bad. Does that make sense? So ignorance is bliss is not true for a human being of normal intelligence. How do you feel about that? Are you going, oh no? Yeah.
Isn't intent important?
Yep.
So if intent is important and I don't realize what I'm doing, how does that play out?
Well, there's not realizing what you're doing, but then there's what you just want to do, right? So there's many different factors, right? So there's the recipient, the person, the support, how it comes about. There's the object, and so that's what you actually are doing. And then attitude is the why. That's your motivation. So, it's tricky because you could say that it is less heavy to put down an animal if you're feeling compassion about their suffering. But are you really putting them down because of wanting to put them out of their suffering? Or are you trying to put you out of your suffering of having to look after them? What's actually happening? So these four weights, or these four branches that dictate weight, how it applies in real time, you just have to sit with what was motivating me and what was at play. But if you know that the people in your life have probably been the people in your life for a really long time, good and bad, it's in our own best interest to make our relationships as harmonious as we can, because we're just going to keep bumping into them. Yeah. Yay! Oh no. Right. So any questions so far about karma? I know it's a lot to give you in one night, and those of you doing the course, you're gonna sleep on it, it's gonna digest, and then throughout the course we're gonna unpack the specifics and then what we do with this information. But it's kind of nice to information load you the night before, because then it percolates back there as you sleep. And then we can have some good questions the next day. But some of you probably are going tonight, so if you have any questions so far, please ask. Or good arguments. Oh, yeah. Yeah, one and then two.
So if you have someone in your life who's not a very nice person, then it can can be a good thing because it can continually make you stronger.
Yeah.
In a positive way.
Yeah. Yep. Which is not to say that you don't call them on their bad behavior, right? Which is not to say that you become a doormat, but it means that your peace isn't destroyed by being with them. You start to see them as a project rather than a problem. And not a project to fix externally, but a project internally to make yourself stronger and stronger in terms of your resilience. Do you know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, when I try to interact with someone thinking about karma, sometimes feel that I'm faking, or I'm just doing an exercise, and one point is like empty of, I don't know, sensitivity, or empty of life in a way. It's like, okay, I just put myself in this comfortable situation of analyzing the situation, and then, playing, also with the person, like trying to make good karma out of this situation.
Yeah, that you become, like detached and disengaged, right? Like to be detached is quite useful. To be disengaged can be quite harmful. So if you're detached, that means you have objectivity. You have space to check, is what I'm doing objectively beneficial, as well as personally beneficial and externally beneficial. You have some space, like a scientist, to go useful or not. Right? But disengaged means, and whatever happens to them, I don't care. Right? That's like completely disengaged. You're saying, oh, it's your karma, it has nothing to do with me, live your life, I'm just going to work on myself. That's like disengaged, and that becomes its own problem. So internally, we're just trying to find that line where we're taking full responsibility for ourselves, and we're doing the best we can to bring positive conditions to others. But the way we're looking at others is with a letting go attitude that knows we don't have the whole picture. So we actually will never know the best thing to do until we're enlightened. So you kind of do your very best and let go. Do your very best and let go. Yeah. And so it's a delicate line that you have to check moment to moment to make sure that you're not objectifying people, isn't it? Yeah, turning them into substances to, feed you in some way. Yeah, and it's easy to fall into that trap. But I mean, the fact that you know that that trap exists is a good sign, means you're less likely to fall into it. Yeah, it's a good sign. Yeah, other questions? Yeah.
I think you might have just said this, but so with intention. So it's quite clear in the text that one of the best intentions you can have is going to be compassion for other sentient beings.
Yeah.
And that's a great intention to get the message inside you and say, I want to have that intention. I really want to be able to embody that message. But, it's a regular day for me, and I can't get that fully embodied in me. And I'm trying to get a situation where I'm also being honest to myself, present in the moment. And I don't want to be, grasping for this thing that's greater than I have the capacity for at the moment.
Yeah.
So the best thing to do is just try the best, okay?
Well, certainly that's a good way to operate, but also you have to remember that wanting all sentient beings to be free from suffering, having compassion, doesn't mean you have to be successful, right? Wanting sentient beings to be free from suffering means that you see their suffering and you see their potential for freedom simultaneously. Empathy would just see their suffering, right? And being able to see someone suffering is a useful tool and a useful skill, but very manipulative people also are able to feel with others and then use it for their own aims. It's said that Hitler had a great deal of empathy. We would never say that, right? That sounds crazy. But of course he was able to tune into the crowd and to know how to manipulate them and what would sort of tap into their vulnerabilities and their afflictions and kind of get a whole mass of people to behave incredibly badly. So empathy is just kind of a value-neutral skill that we can use in a good way or a bad way. But when we're trying to help, when we're trying to be good, when we're trying to be kind to people from a place of only empathy, then we get tired out. because we want them to be free of their suffering, but we kind of feel like we need to see that that's happening right now in front of us. And it actually puts a bit of pressure on us and a bit of pressure on them for that to all happen right in this moment. Whereas real compassion is like an open-handed goodwill, which is just really rawly wishing people well, whether they get well or not, whether they feel it or not. But thinking, may you be well and happy, fills you up with a contentment and a peace and a worldview that puts everything into the right context. And then if help is possible, you're able to do it. And if help isn't possible, you kind of have it within a framework that doesn't disturb your peace. So it's not about like success or failure or it working or not. Compassion for others is in your own best interest because it's a framework to live by. And of course we're going to forget. And of course we're not going to do it perfectly. But if you keep coming back to what is the point of my life? What is the meaning I want to bring to my life? How do I want to be internally? How do I want to be externally? If we keep asking that question, it becomes more and more like our default way of being. Whereas if we ask that question with too much pressure on ourselves, then we try for a while, are not successful, and give up and feel terrible. You know what I mean? So it's not with pressure, it's just with framework, right? This is the way I want to live, but this is a long-haul project. This is a marathon project. You know, the world's not going to fix just because I want everyone to be happy. You know, but if I'm operating that way, my potential for effectiveness is more. Does that make sense? Or
yeah, that was very nice. You need to ask another question, I think.
Yeah. No follow-up question.
I have another question.
Yeah. No, it's important to kind of play around with it. Of what would this look like in my life? What would this look like with my particular set of people? You know, if I'm going to operate this way, how do I bring what's called skillful means to this teaching? Because we have such different life circumstances that what looks like compassion from one person might not actually land as compassion, you know? And to be able to have the flexibility of mind that says, if I have this background steady motivation, then it can have the flexibility to either speak or not speak, to take action or not take action. We don't get into a rut with our compassion. Yeah, we don't get lazy with our compassion. Lazy with compassion could be that, okay, these 3 things worked that one time with that one friend. So now I'm going to do these 3 things every time I see suffering. And if they don't work, I'm going to feel crap or be mad at them. Right? And the 3 things might be, you know, a joke, a cup of tea, a walk on the beach. And it really worked well that one time. Yeah, that guy was really sad. We said, all right, let's do these things. And it totally worked out. And you're like, oh, I'm a good friend. Yeah, and then your next distressed friend, you try those same things and it doesn't work. You think, what is wrong with me? What is wrong with you? You know, whereas real compassion is just this kind of open-ended framework that then can be flexible of, given what I know about life so far, let's try this. Oh, it didn't work, okay. Let's try this, okay. Yeah, it can be flexible. And this is the problem with our short-sightedness, is that we want to have a shortcut. We want to have a plan that's going to work every single time. We want a plan that's going to work consistently with all people. We want to just like figure it out and do that. And life is too nuanced, right? Things change too often for the same thing to work every time. But the same thing can work every time if the motivation is consistent. Then the behaviors flow with wisdom, rather than you kind of like manufacturing. Yeah. Have you ever been mad at someone for not appreciating your help? Right? I'm just trying to help, right? It was not compassion, right? That was some compassion, and then attachment co-opted it and made it its own, and compassion was actually gone. You made it about you. Yeah. If you want someone to be well and you want someone to be happy, and it works, that's great. But if it doesn't, you think, oh, what's wrong? And if attachment has done that, it says, oh, what's wrong with you that it didn't work? Or what's wrong with me that it didn't work? It centralizes. It gets some sort of identity tangled up with it. You just, you know, attachment's much softer, much wiser than that. And so there's a misnomer out there in the world today called compassion fatigue, which is BS. There's no such thing. There is no such thing as compassion fatigue. But there is empathic distress. Absolutely there's empathic distress. They're two totally separate things. So if your compassion was pure, attachment would not co-opt it. But as soon as attachment co-opts compassion, you get worn out. You really do. You get absolutely tired and burnt out. But if you didn't have all that pressure and expectation and goal orientation and identity, you could just be wishing people well and never run out. So it's worth just exploring in our own life what is empathic distress, because I'm feeling with, but without a plan or a refuge or a framework. I'm just feeling with. Like if you see the news and, people are dying in wars and children are starving and you just cry and cry and cry, that's empathic distress. That's not compassion. It's poignant and it's useful to be touched. But that's not actually compassion. Yeah? Compassion can see all of that suffering and hold all of that suffering and wish all of those beings freedom from that suffering, but not become distressed. Does that make sense? Do you have some argument with that? Preempting negative states of mind and preempting the ability for negative karma to arise, that's kind of our everyday walking around project. Yeah? The habit is going to drive unless we preempt the habit with something different. Yeah? And the habit is short-sightedness and self-absorption. Because it makes sense in the immediate, right? And it makes sense from kind of animal mind. So it's not like we're bad for being short-sighted or self-centered. It's normal. Everyone is. Yeah. And if you know that about people, you're less disappointed in them, right? But if you know that about yourself, then you can consciously reorient yourself differently, and that becomes the new habit, and that becomes the new normal. Right. So, any hanging issues you want to discuss? Or miscellaneous questions about Buddhism before we finish for the night? If you've seen anything on the property that you're curious about and you're wondering what it is, or if you've heard anything that you wanted to ask about, or things written here. Yeah?
The bird offering?
Mm-hmm.
Well, can you explain that?
Like the one that we do in that little house by the bamboo? Yeah. The burnt offering practice, the Dorje Kadjo practice, that if you're walking around in daylight, go have a peek in that tiny building by the bamboo. There's like a big scary monster going, it's cool, right? Go have a look. You're allowed. Basically, this is one of the purification practices we do to prevent negative karma from arising as suffering. And what we do is we imagine that all of our negative karma, like actions out of anger, out of attachment, any kind of harmful thing, that it sort of takes the form of black sesame seeds that we put into the shape of a scorpion, because scorpions are scary, right? And then what we do is we light a fire under this scary monster, who is actually a wrathful form of compassion, because sometimes compassion needs strength. And we offer it into the mouth of this deity, thinking that it burns up all our negative karma. It only actually burns up all our negative karma if we also have regret in place, if we also have refuge in our spiritual path in place, and if we actually have a plan for how to live differently in place. So this is kind of the remedy part of the four opponent powers, this offering sesame seeds into the mouth of this deity. But sometimes some people learn better in a tactile way, some people are more visual, some people really like a strong smell, and so Buddhism has practices that kind of operate on every sensory level to tie into a mentality. And so for some people, a Dorje Kadjo practice is very cathartic, because you're offering seeds into the mouth and then they burn up. It's very visual, it's very sensorial. Some people prefer to do a mantra. Some people like to do prostrations. Some people visualize extensively. And when you have masterclass superpowers, you combine all of the senses together with the intention. So Dorje Kadjo burnt offering practice is a purification practice. And maybe if people want to do it, we can do it at the end of the course. If enough people are interested, maybe we can do it. If you like. You want to burn stuff? We can. And anyway, burning stuff's fun. Any other questions? Yes.
I was wondering about karma in the case of
Yeah, or like a similar action.
Yes, one is separate.
Yeah, we have individual karma, but we do also have like shared karma in the sense that we've all done similar things, so we wind up in similar circumstances. So if in the case of genocide, say, 100 people do many actions of killing, many actions that are really negative, then when those people that did the wrong thing die, they're probably going to be reborn in a cluster together with very similar environmental effects. So there's 4 effects of karma, and we'll talk about those tomorrow. But one of them is the environment that you're born into. And there's, it's interesting to think about the stories we know from war, because even if you're born in a war-torn situation, everybody's experience of war is slightly different, and what happens to them during the war is slightly different. So you have your shared karma to be born in a war zone, but then you have your individual karma about how badly or well that plays out. But if a group of people do a group action, probably they're going to be reborn together in a group similarly, with a similar sort of environment. So in the case of Nazis, it probably didn't end well, right? And wherever they were reborn is probably not fun, and they're all together, not having fun together. But no rebirth is forever. No consequence is forever. Karma, eventually finishes, and no one is a lost cause. But certainly there are people that have gotten such strong negative habits in their mind that it's going to take a really long time for them to, quote, grow out of it, right, or move through into their own potential. Yeah, did that answer your question, or did you have another question?
Yeah, because what you said about the component of karma being so complex, like so many good things and bad things from different previous lives. For me, it's like surprising that because of people can be in that very similar situation.
Yeah.
Causes are so different.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not like necessarily the case that they'll all be reborn together, but if they had very similar intentions, very similar actions done towards a very similar set of people, then it makes sense that their rebirth would be of a similar type. But the main factor that ripens the seed that will project our next rebirth is the state of mind we have as we die. So if you lived a very unfortunate life with a lot of negative actions, if you're still able to bring up a positive state of mind at the time of death, somewhere in there's some good karma, and that can ripen as a good rebirth. And similarly, if you've led a very good life full of positive actions, if at the time of death you're very angry and full of lots of negative states of mind, that ripens a negative seed for a negative rebirth. But none of this is forever. There's no eternal anything. And a lot of the rebirths that are described last for great lengths of time, but none of them forever. And basically, all of our potential is perfection. It's just a matter of effort and time. Yeah. But yeah, people that have done the wrong thing many times, they get wired that way. Yeah, and so it becomes harder and harder to break that habit, but not impossible. Not impossible. But there's some people that where they're never going to change in this life. But it doesn't mean they're never going to change primordially. There might be people that would be classed as, borderline personality disorder or psychopaths or some sort of combination of behaviors that was really wrong, and now they're in prison and unrepentant, right? It doesn't mean that they're going to somehow become magically a Buddha in that life. No, it might be a lost cause life, but it's not that forever. Yeah, different conditions will maybe bring out the best in them. It's just... give it time. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
So what happens at this perfection state?
Well, it's going to be great. I don't know. No, perfection is going to be when all of your negative states of mind have been completely undermined. So your negative states of mind, like anger and jealousy, etc., will no longer arise. You won't have to put any effort into preventing them. The habit won't be there anymore. And then on the positive side, all your positive states of mind, like compassion and wisdom, will be completely developed to their utmost extent, which we think is omniscience. And so perfection is this mental state without any suffering, without any negative states of mind, with all good qualities complete and perfected, and that's the nature of every single being that has a mind. So this is enlightenment, whereas nirvana is just a state beyond sorrow, a mental state without suffering. So we're aiming for enlightenment, not just mere nirvana, although at least if we achieve nirvana, we wouldn't be causing any trouble. So yeah, that makes sense. So we want nirvana plus. Yeah. And so this is also called Buddhahood. Perfection, enlightenment, Buddhahood are synonymous. All right, so let's dedicate the effort we put into this public talk and just turn to page 246. There's a little dedication prayer. And so we think all of the positive karma we created through listening, reflecting, and meditating goes towards these aims. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, obtain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or ever fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored on finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drinks. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness, and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. For as long as space remains, for as long as sentient beings remain, until then may I too remain to dispel the miseries of the world. Okay, so if you want to read more about karma, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment by Lama Tsongkhapa goes into a great amount of detail about karma, and that's where I'm going to draw the teachings from this course from. So it's a really beautiful text. Also, there's a text by His Holiness the Dalai Lama called The Meaning of Life, and that talks about karma really well as well. So have a good night.